There's a new effort to repeal legalized adult-use cannabis in Maine, commonly known as recreational marijuana. The Secretary of State's office gave the green light for a group to start collecting petition signatures to put a citizen initiative on the statewide ballot next November.
Part of the proposed bill would repeal provisions of the Cannabis Legalization Act that allow for the commercial cultivation, sale, purchase, and manufacture of cannabis and cannabis products, and the personal cultivation of cannabis. It also eliminates the tax on the sale of cannabis and cannabis products.
The proposal would still allow people to possess up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis. It would also institute testing and tracking requirements for medical use cannabis.
Marijuana is big business in Maine. According to the Office of Cannabis Policy, retail sales in the state are more than $230 million this year. Matt Hawes, the owner of Brothers Cannabis, says whether or not marijuana is legal, it's going to be available to people. He says regulations keep at-risk people safer.
For someone in recovery, if they are going to go seek out cannabis, if they find it in Maine's adult use program, they're going to find it in an environment where they're receiving product that has been tested, that we have understanding of the dosages, and most importantly, is not being sold alongside other drugs, right? Because when a substance is in demand and it's illegal, the only people who sell it are people who break the law. And we find that when cannabis is sold outside of regulated markets, it's often sold alongside of other drugs. And that becomes particularly dangerous for our at-risk communities, people in recovery and young people.
Hawes says data from the Office of Cannabis Policy shows the regulated cannabis market has been highly effective in mitigating illegal cannabis sales.